not so special election, post-election episode of The Hangout here with Abdel Rahman Murphy and our forever guest, Sheikh Abdel Nasser Jangda.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Hopefully everybody's doing good. Having a fantastic week. Superb, tremendous, huge, fantastic week.
Unbelievably, tremendous.
Bigly, amazingly fantastic week.
So we're recording this right now. It's Wednesday afternoon. We actually had a completely different topic in mind because just like the rest of the free world, we were under the assumption that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Yeah. And
which we probably still would have spoken about for at least a bit.
Yeah. But I think now,
there's a lot more to talk about. Given
the results from last night's escapade, we have a lot more to discuss, and I think that everyone's got questions, everyone's got thoughts on their mind. If you look at social media, I mean, even the weather here in Dallas is gloomy, it's dark. It just feels like everybody's sort of reflecting on.
Everyone's taking a day.
We all need a mental health day today, dude.
Everybody took a day today.
We just need a day. Did the students at the seminary talk about it?
Yeah. I had a really awesome conversation with them.
What did you guys talk about? What is it, year one or year two?
Year one. And the year two folks just a little bit, but I think Mufti Kamani kind of had a conversation with them. So I spoke to the year one folks. I kind of just broke it down into a few points. Actually, ever since the thing started unfolding last night and it all started coming together or coming apart, however you want to look at it, depending on your political affiliation, I just started doing...
I think only that Sajid Tarar guy thinks it was coming together. Yep. The guy was like, Donald Trump.
This is so strange. By the way, every week I'm always kind of consuming something on the air because...
Today's food is being sponsored by
Crispy
M&Ms. Sheikh Abdel Nasser.
I like to eat on the air because it's good manners.
Do you just for breakfast? You just pour a bowl of these with some milk, eat M&Ms as cereal,
put a bunch of M&Ms in a bowl, pour some soda on top.
Not chocolate milk.
No,
soda. Nesquik,
straight up, Dr. Pepper, but
mango juice. Okay.
So once the picture started becoming a little bit more clear, we kind of started to realize what we were looking at. I just started reading anything I could find, anything I could get my hands on. There's a lot of interesting folks, a lot of very smart people as well, activists who are online kind of posting, and they practically just started having kind of like a conversation of their own, just reflecting, talking about what exactly happened, what exactly transpired, why it happened, how it happened, and what we can learn from it, and what not to do again, et cetera, et cetera. So I read that. I was probably reading till like 3 a.m. Mm-hmm. Just because of one of those moments, it just really captured kind of my attention. And then woke up, went to sleep for a little bit, woke up for Fajr, went back to sleep, probably woke up again around like 7, and then was reading till pretty much class time. And then even during the breaks between class, I was just reading. So I was able to kind of mentally construct like a little flow of thoughts. So I just had these like 5 or 6 bullet points that I kind of went through with them. And I think the students felt pretty comfortable at the end of the conversation.
What were some of those bullet points? Well, I mean, you don't have to go in detail, but just like maybe...
kind of list them off?
Yeah.
First of all, just a personal thought.
Just to be clear, these are all personal thoughts, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But no, the first one is not even like a technical thing. It's not like an analytical point. It's just like communicating just internally what's kind of going on with me and in my head more so. I understand I don't mean to minimize the racism, the sexism, the xenophobia, the bias, the fascism, like everything that, the sexual predatory behavior. I don't mean to minimize any of that and to cast that aside at all. But one of the things, and again, we can kind of talk a little bit more openly here.
We're just hanging out.
Listen, let's not pretend like we haven't seen terrible people come into office before.
What do you mean?
I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan as president of the United States, and I know that Reagan is kind of like he's glorified. He's Captain America for all these modern day Republicans.
Yeah, it's like they talk about the Reagan party of Reagan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan was pretty racist.
Really?
I mean, come on now.
I didn't know that. I was born in 88.
Yeah, trickle-down economics, preyed on black communities.
That's Prey, by the way. He didn't spiritually prey on them.
He prayed their janazas.
Stuck for a long
Not a joke anymore.
Toba.
But yeah,
took advantage, exploitation.
Yeah,
financially, socially,
heavy. So,
and this was like well before, kind of like in between the civil rights period and kind of before the post-civil rights, kind of like Black Lives Matter movement was sort of even in its preconception stages.
Exactly.
So it was like a time of a very strong vulnerability for minority people of color.
It was really scary, and and then you had Senior Bush and their whole war on drugs. What do you think that was? That was a war on black people. That was a war on black neighborhoods. So we've seen racist people in office before.
So what you're saying is basically this didn't necessarily shock you.
No, it didn't. We've seen sexist people before. I mean, Bill Clinton is a predator.
Yeah.
Ironically, his wife called black young men super predators.
Yeah.
And he's the real predator.
Dang, Shake, you're lit today.
I just
as the young folks say, keeping it 100 for all of our listeners.
So,
pretty woke right now, aren't you?
Such stupid terminology. It's like not even vocabulary, but so we've seen sexist and racist and all these terrible human beings be in office before. The thing that I just would not penetrate my skull, I could not wrap my noggin around, and that's why I was up till 3 a.m. just staring at the television. And actually, like I was telling you before we got started recording, I didn't get to see his whole acceptance speech, and I like to do quotation marks, acceptance speech. I didn't get to see the whole thing because I had just turned it off and just been like, I can't watch this anymore. And then I saw on my phone like an update, somebody saying, "Oh, I'm watching the acceptance speech." And I was like, "Oh God, let me just go ahead and see what the idiot is saying now." But, and I found myself with my jaw just dropped.
Why?
Like I just kind of found my mouth like just open, like just sitting there with my jaw on the floor, and I realized the thing that really befuddled me, confounded me, was the fact that we, and I say we because we're Americans, we had just elected a reality TV star to the office of President of the United States. That's the part that bothers me the most.
Why? Out of everything. I mean, like you said, the preface was, you didn't want to minimize any of these other very serious crimes.
Not minimizing any of those things. But I understand the institution and the establishment of politics is dirty business. They're all crooks. They're all thieves. They're all liars.
Except for Bernie, but...
Yeah, Bernie banned. But, I understand the institution, the nature of kind of like the I guess the field, the work, the industry, whatever you want to call it. But it just shows a profound level of stupidity on the part of the people to elect somebody because they see them on TV.
Now, there's some people actually saying that was one of his major advantages. It's almost as if he's been campaigning
for whatever
since he started The Apprentice. What is it, like 10 years? I don't know.
Something like that, yeah.
And he's owned that pageant, the Miss Universe or Miss World or Miss USA, whatever it's called. So people actually said last night, like, he basically had a head start on the campaign because he's just been in the public eye in a I wouldn't say favorable way, but in a way that was a little more lighthearted. He's not a politician.
In a way that wasn't very intrusive or wasn't very
well, we all saw him as a joke, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And he was some rich guy on a TV show just kind of doing his thing. So
you're fired.
Exactly.
That's it.
And so it's like I don't know. I'm trying to find the right words for it, but it wasn't very. I just keep coming to the word kind of intrusive. There's another word I'm looking for, but it just didn't seem to bother us.
It was kind of innocuous.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we weren't, when it comes to politics, when it comes to somebody vying in an election or whatever the case may be, we kind of take it seriously. But if somebody's just on TV trying to entertain us, you're kind of like half watching, checking your phone. The person doesn't bother you that much. But without realizing that person is basically taking up space, is moving into your subconscious.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually pretty deep. I think that there is this this misunderstanding that like watching something is neutral.
Yeah.
When in fact, when you're watching, you are voting.
Yeah.
You're contributing to that person's ratings.
Yeah.
And in a way, no one could have predicted that Donald Trump was going to run for president.
Holy God.
You know, I remember when Keith Ellison, our boy,
Yeah.
may Allah preserve him, inshallah, when he mentioned it on, I think it was Meet the Press or one of those shows, we just talked about that. George Stephanopoulos, our Greek homie, he laughed, and all the commentators started laughing, and they were like, "Oh, there's no way that's going to happen." And Keith Ellison, I think this was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he said, "Be very careful. Like, he has a shot. He has a legitimate shot." But none of us really knew. I mean, it's almost as if today, as if I told you, Kim Kardashian's going to run for president. You know, you would just be like, "No, she's not. She's a reality TV star. What business does she have in politics?" You know, no experience,
we
nothing.
Wouldn't say
but
that anymore now.
Not anymore, right? He's open.
And subhanAllah, I was telling the students, I thought about it yesterday, election day, in the morning when I head out of home and I was coming for the class. While I was getting to my car, I actually thought to myself, I said the closest parallel that I can think of, obviously this is a bigger deal as president, but the closest parallel I can think of like this is, I was thinking to call up maybe some of the imams or even just I have some other friends who also are in kind of like policy type work in California, and I was going to ask them, what did you feel like? Like, what was the first thing that went through your mind when you found out Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, was your governor? What did that feel like? Did you just feel immediately, did you instantly feel stupid? Did you just feel like you were living in a cartoon?
Or just Jesse Ventura, the wrestler, remember?
Yep.
Minnesota, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like what?
What does that feel like?
Yeah.
Like, this guy used to be on the WWE, and he's now my governor. I mean, Donald Trump used to be on some stupid reality TV show, and now he's our president.
It's so unnerving. What do you think Obama's thinking right now? No, seriously.
I would just think about how awkward it's going to be that if Trump visits the White House like tomorrow or whatever, literally Monday morning, Monday evening, Obama was like actually quoted. I think there were clips of him and stuff talking about him being like Trump being like mentally unstable and stuff. And he's going to have to like welcome him in. And,
well, now all the Democrats, because it wasn't just the presidency, but it was the entire basically three branches of government, right? So you have the executive branch was won obviously by Republican. You have the
legislative, the whole Congress, Senate.
They're Republican majority now, and then the eventuality for the Supreme Court, the judicial, is going to be.
I think I read somewhere that obviously there's one seat open, and I think I read somewhere like two of the justices are like in their 80s.
Yeah, they're getting to that point where they're not going to be fit to serve
God,
anymore.
like, could Donald Trump appoint 3 Supreme Court justices?
Well, that's the rhetoric the Republicans were using against Hillary.
Yeah.
You know, they were saying, yeah, Donald Trump's a crazy person, but do you want Hillary to have the power over
to appoint 3 bankers to the Supreme Court? She straight up appoints like 3 bankers to the Supreme Court.
Goldman and Sachs take 2 of the seats. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, and I think that, to be honest with you, Donald Trump himself, as much as his rhetoric was inflammatory, I never really felt, scared of him as a person, because I know that he's a business person. I know that he's a salesperson. What I felt scared of were 2 things. Number one was the voter base that he activated. Yeah. The people that are walking in front of Irving Masjid with rifles. Yeah. Those people, right? And the ones that when I am driving on a road trip and I'm wearing my kufi and I have my beard, which, this lady on the plane next to me one time was like, "That's not a fashionable beard. That's a religious beard." And I was like, "Yeah, you got that right." And then we started talking about, Islam.
And then she asked you how come an Amish person can be on a plane?
Yeah, she's like, so I didn't know you guys could use electricity on the plane. So number one is like my own, self. Obviously, I have a lighter skin tone. I'm white, and so at that point, I do, alhamdulillah, fall into certain levels of privilege where my worry and my anxiety is not going to overtake me. But my wife is Bengali. She wears the headscarf, the hijab. Mm-hmm. Are we going to stop in Weatherford, Texas for gas? Yeah. It's 11 p.m. and we're on a road trip. Are we going to stop? Like, what is my thought process? So,
you can still stop at Buc-ee's, though.
Buc-ee's.
We'll always have Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's is like a safe haven for everybody.
Everyone. Please.
For those of you who don't know, Buc-ee's is like this if a Kmart,
it's a great place.
if a Kmart and a mobile Exxon had a child, it would be Buc-ee's, and it would live in the middle of nowhere in Texas. No, it really is. It's one of those really unique retail outlets. They have obviously gas and everything, but you go inside and they got like candy corn and Texas paraphernalia and like 80 different flavors of tea, iced tea,
and beef jerky.
Beef jerky, which you should not even know about, stuff for Latoba. But so that was number one. Number one is I was really afraid of the voter base. Number two is what we just talked about, which is the entire government being turned red.
Yeah.
And that was a very scary thing because when you look at it, you know, the checks and balances that are sort of built in, those things kind of become a little bit weaker when there's so much, when there's no parity, right? When it's just one side dominating. So that's an incredibly interesting thing.
So yeah, my first thing was just I don't know, it was just dismay at the fact that we just elected
a celebrity.
Yeah, essentially
with no political or military experience.
Nothing.
This is unprecedented probably.
Yeah.
What was your next thing?
And the next thing was the next thing I kind of mentioned was it was a really powerful reminder of the fact that this was, you know, and again, to give credit where credit's due, what Van Jones talked about on CNN last night, he called it a white lash, but this is basically...
That was amazing. That was awesome.
Yeah.
He was
rattled.
He just opened his heart.
Yeah. And this is kind of this is white supremacy kind of pushing back. I read an interesting thing last night where it talked about how Jim Crow came after the Reconstruction of the South. And so what's very interesting is that the history of kind of white supremacy here in this country has been that every single time there is progress that is made, a couple of steps are taken forward, a couple of steps are pushed back very harshly.
Yeah, like the white lash.
Exactly. So what he called the white lash, very appropriately, very beautifully. Yeah. And so this was the white lash. And a couple of things that kind of like solidified that for me was that we obviously know that there's a gender issue as well in the world and in America. But 73% of white women voting for Donald Trump tells you that their whiteness is more important to them than their being women.
And being women here is relevant because Donald Trump was such a horrible person.
Oh my God. What did he not say or do? Like what? Like even when he was given opportunities like, oh, you said this about this woman, you called her Miss Piggy, or you called her fat, or you called her gross and disgusting. Instead of being like, that was very wrong of me, that was very inappropriate, I apologize. He was like, yeah, I did. Have you seen her?
Yeah.
Like that was he would double down every single time.
It's so interesting. It's like he was playing the part of average Joe.
Yeah.
And they loved it. Like,
yeah.
you know, and I used to live amongst, I mean, even in Texas, like this, you know, we're in Dallas, a bigger city, but when I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, you know, serving the community there, I mean, a lot of these people were like in the city limits, in the suburban areas, and you would meet them.
Yeah.
And and you know, the crazy thing was the women who were defending him when he was saying this stuff, and they would say, oh, boys will be boys, or locker room talk, or whatever the line was. And they, like you said, they looked past Hillary Clinton, and you know, obviously she has her own set of problems, but the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she could represent so much progress for women, they looked right past her. To
his rhetoric about making America great again, which was basically making America white again.
Yeah, because Hillary is campaigning with Barack and Michelle, you know, two very powerful black people.
Right.
That really unsettled a lot of people.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is one of the scariest things. And I wanted to bring up a question. I mean, I know we got to get through your list that you went through.
No, that's fine.
But I wanted to bring up a question kind of in the midst of this, which is like, how does a group of people, like, if we're going to talk philosophically here, spiritually, you know, you're trained in the Islamic sciences, how does a group of people get to a point where this can happen as a society or as a community? How did we get here? You know, I think people are part of the reason why today feels like Voldemort has returned.
Yeah.
Is because people are just like, didn't we just have 8 years of progress? Like,
yeah.
We had a black man in the White House. We had so many things. Obviously, he was also had his faults. You know, the droning and everything. No one's endorsing.
No.
You can't endorse anyone except for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like,
yes.
you can't endorse anyone in their totality.
Yeah, we're not having a fiqh conversation here. I mean, this is just kind of like, as American Muslims, just kind of sitting here the day afterwards, what goes through your head.
And there's another actually question I'm going to get to you about that. How did we get here? We had somebody that represented so much progress, and now we're, like you said, that white lash, we took, 5 steps back. Mm-hmm. But what's actually going on inside of us as people? Like, what are some of the things that we have to think about deeply? Muslim, non-Muslim, whatever. What are some thoughts that you had about that?
So that was one of the other points that I had that I can just kind of answer with this with. And that was, I think that the prophetic model, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of reform and rehabilitation of a community is the ultimate model, and nothing will ever be better. And I know that that's stating the obvious, not stating anything earth-shattering there, but a reminder is very helpful. And when the Prophet ﷺ was given the message, Iqra, to be able to change the entire world, and he came home to Khadija, his wife, radiallahu anha, and he told her, he shared it with her, and then he also mentioned the fact that, Khadija, who's going to accept this? Who's going to believe in this? And at that time, she mentioned a few reasons why she believed, rather, that people were going to believe in, people were going to accept it. And she said, إِنَّكَ تَصِلُ الرَّحِمِ. You're good to your family, you take care of your family. وَتُقْرِ الضَّيْفِ. You're hospitable, honorable to your guest. You are, she went on to say, وَتَكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ. You take care of those who can't take care of themselves. وَتَحْمِلُ الْكَلْ. You lift those who are downfallen, downtrodden. And وَتُعِينُ عَلَى نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ. And you are always willing to help in a good cause. And that type of, I was visited by a Muslim brother recently who actually does a lot of work, has been formally trained, mentored, and does like a lot of community work and organizing and moving and all this kind of stuff. Like he was kind of talking about it, that there's activism and there's organizing, and activism's kind of become just the buzzword. But he said the real thing is organizing. That's real work. And
what's the difference?
The difference is more like activism is just like a general word that just means I'm just trying to contribute to this cause. Organizing is I'm actually in the trenches. Mm-hmm. I have a methodology. I have a manhaj.
Okay.
I have
like the term community organizer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he was basically, kind of mentioning this to me as well, but he was saying community organizing is extremely hands-on work. It doesn't involve Twitter. It doesn't involve Facebook. It doesn't use Instagram. You literally are knocking people's doors. You're sitting with them in front of their homes. You're talking to them in their living rooms. You're walking around on the streets. You're at playgrounds. You're at elementary schools. You're at hospitals. You're at clinics. Like, that's what real organizing looks like. And that's how results are produced. That's how the Prophet ﷺ earned his credibility in his community, so that when he had an actual message and a vision to share, there were people who were willing to buy in and listen to that message and that vision. And that is just what I just described, that type of work, knocking doors and walking the streets and visiting people and sitting with them. And that is, pardon the term, that is not sexy at all. That is not cool. That is not exciting. That is not technologically advanced. That is not any of these other fancy terms that we use. And so we got bored with it, and we neglected it, and then we forgot about it. And what ended up happening was that those who had maybe, possibly, some values or principles or ideas to share, nobody cared what they had to offer. And one of the biggest things at this election, to me at least, what I'm learning just from reading, and this is me just sharing my notes, I'm learning right now. One of the biggest things that I felt like I've learned through this election, just reading in the aftermath from really smart people who know what they're talking about, is, without realizing it, there is a huge dichotomy and polarization within the American citizenry, within the population. So let me demonstrate for you as an example. If I ask you what's between, just say with the first thing, how we would talk about it. What's between Chicago and Detroit? He'd be like, nothing. Just drive through there.
Oh, you mean distance-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
it's just
2 hours, 3 hours?
Yeah, but like if I was to ask you what's in there in that 2-3 hours, you'd be like, middle of nowhere, it's nothing.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask me what's between Dallas and Houston, I'd be like, oh, nothing. It's just a bunch of like nothingness.
Buc-ee's.
Yeah, Buc-ee's. It's actually not nothingness.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's actually millions of human beings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this happened where there were these big city people living their own lives, talking their own rhetoric, kind of being in their own bubbles. And you had people in urban areas kind of living in their own little isolated bubbles, in their own little realities. And that came to a clash. And there's just more of them than there are of us.
And you also had the suburban folk, which is another conversation that I want to have a little bit later.
Okay.
The intoxication of materialism.
Oh.
As long as I have my car, my house, and my Zabita meat, I don't need to get involved in this stuff.
That's the operative word, comfort.
SubhanAllah.
I just want to be comfortable.
Comfort is the nest of
like apathy.
Of apathy, right?
Yeah,
Comfort actually
atrophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the enemy of growth.
It's interesting when you look at all the scholars of purification of the heart, when they highlight different diseases, one of the first things they say is a cure is a jur.
Yeah.
Hunger. Why? Because it causes you to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And even in learning, Vygotsky, Piaget, they say learning always takes place where? In an uncomfortable place.
Awesome.
You know, when I'm sitting in class and I'm reading to you, I'm uncomfortable because the information is new. I don't know it yet. So as I'm reading it, I'm still trying to process it and synthesize it. You already know it because you're the teacher, so you're in a place of comfort. You may not learn anything. But for me as the student, I'm uncomfortable because I don't already know this. So I look up to you every sentence and I say, is that right? Is that what he's saying? You say, yeah. So there's a lot of discomfort there. But we'll talk about suburbia in a little bit. But the concept of sort of overlooking people, forgetting especially the downtrodden, you know, these are prophetic qualities that we find are, you know, flagrantly absent in society, but also we are a reflection of our society. Of
course.
You know, Muslims in the greater society don't
we have a greater responsibility because we know who the Prophet ﷺ is.
So let me play devil's advocate, all right? Not that I'm Shaitan's friend or anything, but let me
partner.
Let me play. I love how your Shaitan accent always has like a southern twang.
Why does Shaitan sound like this?
Sounds like George Bush. Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here. I was having a discussion earlier today with someone that I really love and respect, a good friend of mine, someone actually that, you know, part of the reason why I'm still involved in the faith as a Muslim is because of his khutbahs in college.
MashaAllah. Very
good guy, mashallah. Shout out to Abdel Sattar. And we were kind of getting into this discussion about, you know, the voter population for Donald Trump and the voter population for the right, for the red. And he was basically making the point that, you know, as American Muslims, we feel comfortable living in America, but we don't necessarily fit in yet. And he was saying that people will, you know, hate us, and half the country maybe has shown through their voting that they are against, you know, Muslims, or at least I guess you could say like practicing Muslims, devout Muslims, traditional, whatever you want, whatever label you want to put on that. And he was essentially saying that, you know, this is a reality that we're going to have to deal with. And the point that I was trying to make, and I want to get your perspective on this, because I've been thinking more and more about his point. And the point that I was trying to make is that I think we're just really bad neighbors.
Yeah.
And when I say neighbors, I'm speaking figuratively. I don't mean literally the three people that you live around, but I'm saying like classmates, coworkers.
Yeah.
We're not very talented at that. You know, I talked, you know, up until, what is it, the last decade in our Sunday schools, we've been teaching kids that being friends with non-Muslims is
not permissible.
Haram.
Yeah.
You know, haram bay. R.I.P., right? No, we've been teaching kids that it's haram. And I wonder if that's like an indication of something greater. Like, do we have this condescension complex with non-Muslims? Does that prevent? And I'm not speaking to the exception. You know, you have your Betty Auntie story, which we can talk about. I have Mrs. Mueller, who, when my mom had to go take an exam when she was doing her degree, she would drop us off at Mrs. Mueller's house. Complete trust. You know, we had across the street, his first name was Bernard. I forget his last name, but every week.
I don't think he needs a last name after Bernard.
Bernard, right? It's like Bernard. That's his whole name. He used to bring over cinnamon rolls every week. You know, my mom used to make them kushari, which is Egyptian, basically khichdi, like rice and lentils. There was a very communal aspect. Mr. Richardson down the street. I used to mow his lawn for $10 a week. Like, I remember these people and they remember us, and guess who becomes the reference point for Islam for them?
Y'all.
Our family.
Yeah.
So my point that I was trying to make, which I felt very passionate about, and I still kind of do, as you can probably tell, is that I think that we're on the whole, not exceptionally, on the whole, we're pretty bad neighbors. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't really do neighborly things, and some of that might be cultural difference. But what are your thoughts on that? How are we? Grade us. Maybe you can give us some stories, and how can we get better at that? Because clearly that's impacted how people perceive us.
Yeah.
And is it our responsibility even?
I think it is. That's what I'm basically talking about, is that we want to enact this philosophical, maybe even theological, social change in society. But before the Prophet ﷺ did that, he qualified himself to the people through the attributes that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha is mentioning. And that involves being... That requires being involved in people's lives, having a positive impact in your surroundings, and that's missing for most. If for there very few. Well, qalilu kanadir. The Arabs would say that very few. When you basically don't say all, because there's very few examples, they said those very few don't really even add up to a percentage, so you can't really claim anything at that point. Pretty much
like how many votes Gary Johnson got.
Yeah. Gary Johnson, but
he's wild. He's probably climbing a mountain right now, smoking weed.
I don't understand him at all. But
wild. He's somebody's crazy uncle.
And what is Aleppo?
He's like, Aleppo is the negative of Aleppo. Aleppo. It's like, you're a weirdo.
So,
but in all seriousness, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help them.
I mean,
and give them aid over their oppressors.
So it's so rare that you can't really take any credit for it at that point. So I think it's pretty fair to say that most, of us haven't really followed that prophetic model at all. I am open to one thing in this conversation, and I kind of saw something. And even though I didn't engage in this rhetoric because I don't think it's necessarily helpful, but I saw a lot of people kind of like talking about like, I don't know how I'm going to explain this to my kids that Donald Trump won. And I saw a conversation between two African-American imams, two black imams, Imam Dawood from Michigan and Imam Mark from Cali. And they said something interesting. Imam Dawood basically said that I don't need to explain anything to my kids. I've been explaining to my kids, their whole life what America is. And I thought that was kind of like, wow. So maybe there is, maybe it's a little bit of an element. So I've always thought
maybe it's only a wake-up call for some of us.
Exactly, for some of us. Because I do think that there's a very unique perspective that comes out of the African-American, the Black Muslim community that truly has a greater sense of being American and not having to prove that they're American, not having to earn their Americanness.
I saw Mark's wife, Marjorie, who we both met. She's one of the leaders of the Muslim Anti-Racism Coalition, awesome. Run by Sister Namira as well from
amazing effort, mashallah.
Michigan, mashallah.
Check them out, Muslim ARC.
They do education, advocacy,
mashallah.
Training for different organizations, but I think they particularly focus in the Muslim community about understanding, the philosophically what is race, what is racism, and how that impacts us on a very deep level, white supremacy, things like that. And she actually said something really profound. She tweeted, that a lot of people are talking about taking off their headscarves out of fear for their lives. And she said, and she also wears the headscarf, by the way, but she said, being black, I've always had to fear for my life. Like, I've always had a target. I've always been a target, I think is what she said. So it's kind of like, there is a community that this doesn't really change much for them in terms of, talking to their kids or feeling less safe. Yeah. And that's something that we can definitely learn from.
Yeah, I mean, the other candidate who we wouldn't, like we've talked about, we weren't crazy, and that's going to be one of the next points, we weren't crazy about and we didn't like either. But we definitely, let's not deny this, let's not lie to ourselves, we would have been breathing a sigh of relief this morning if she would have won last night.
Yeah.
That it wasn't Trump.
Yeah.
And that same woman called young black children super predators.
And actually said that we need to bring them to heel. When you say heel, what are you talking to usually?
A dog.
A dog.
Subhanallah.
Dehumanizing.
Ajib.
Again, people can change.
Sure.
But it's clear that these are things that are patterns
Yeah.
of behavior, even the way that she addressed, the Black Lives Matter protesters that would show up and ask her to explain herself. And there was really no direct apology for those things, I think, until the second debate with Bernie, or the last debate with Bernie. I think she made some sort of, it's something I shouldn't have said. There was no clear, I'm sorry. Okay. I've learned. I made a mistake. There was none of that. Glenn Beck recently.
Yeah.
That was wild.
That was interesting.
Glenn Beck, a commentator for the right usually, he said that he's learned a lot from the Obama presidency and he supports Black Lives Matter. So we believe in, obviously, people redeeming themselves, but Hillary didn't really go that route, it seems. So
just to answer your question, I do think that we've been extremely neglectful of those responsibilities, and that reflects in our inability to be able to converse with people and exchange ideas with people.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Betty Unti?
So this is always very difficult because it's really, really emotional. But so when I was about 5 years old, my sister was about a year old.
1942.
Yeah. So the last time the Republicans had the entire Congress, but so Harry Truman was president. No, so I, was about 5. My sister was 1. My mom got into a really, really bad accident and shattered her arm, like broke it in like 5 different places or something. They had to completely like reconstruct her arm. So it was really tough. It was really stressful, typical immigrant situation. My dad was working 2 jobs, living in an apartment, trying to get by. And we were in the hospital for quite some time. When my mom was brought home, her arm was in one of those contraptions because they had pins going into her arm to set the bones. God. It was really terrible. And this is, again, before a lot of the more, modern kind of...
Very like primitive, probably,
exactly
equipment.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why she's got these scars that run... They basically cut her whole arm open and just kind of unfolded it, opened it up, God. And had to put it together. There was no laser. There was no laparoscopic, none of this type of stuff. So... But anyways, we come home, and we had this neighbor right across the door, across from us in an apartment, so it's pretty close. Elderly white couple. Guy's name was Larry, kind of drove a semi, kind of on and off. And then there was Betty. She was a retired teacher. And they had one daughter who was away at college, and so they were just kind of doing their own thing. And we came home, and she comes out, and she's like, "What happened? Oh, my God, I didn't see y'all for a few days." And so kind of told her I had this accident, this our situation. And so she said, "Y'all," and my little sister was a year old, so she said, "Y'all look like you could use some help. Let me help you."
I just want to pause here for a second. Notice how she said, she made mention that she hadn't seen y'all for a few days.
Yeah.
That's neighborly.
That is super neighborly.
Right? Like when you notice, for example, that maybe someone's lights aren't on, or they left their lights on. It's like the middle of the night. These are the qualities that I was talking about.
Yeah.
And those are the things that really go a long way. So her saying that obviously let you guys know that she was worried about you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so then she says, "I think you guys need some help."
Y'all need some help. And I'm just really transparent every time I told this story because there's a lot to learn. I learned a lot from it. Typical immigrant mentality was absolute paralyzing fear of the non-Muslim.
Yeah. And also it's shameful to take help.
Exactly.
So there's multiple things at play here.
A lot. And keep in mind that my parents were Pakistani. The reason why that's relevant is that it's not like being Indian. And the difference there is that if you're from India, you interact with non-Muslims.
Yeah.
If you're from Pakistan, you don't interact with non-Muslims.
It's Pakistan.
Exactly.
It's pure. It's the land of purity, right?
So dumb. But
shout out to Qadi Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Why are you giving him a shout out? But
that's my boy.
So but at the same time, beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah.
My dad had to go back to work and bills and the hospital bills and all that good stuff. So we were like, sure. So she started coming over in the morning, and she would, get us ready, get me ready for school, take care of my sister, make some food, all that good stuff. And that just kept going on for weeks and weeks. And then being little kids, when she would kind of go across to her own apartment, being kids, we just try to follow her over there. And she was like, "Oh, kids, I don't know." So then she came over to, my parents and basically said, "Your kids want to follow into my house. And what is it that you would be uncomfortable for your kids to be around?" And, they just mentioned that, not eating pork and then just, alcohol. We're kind of sensitive about the whole alcohol issue. We don't want it around the kids. So she said, okay. And so I think she had mentioned that they didn't eat pork to begin with. And then secondly, about the alcohol issue, her husband she didn't used to drink, but her husband would drink like beers and stuff. So she kind of told Larry, no more beers in the house. And just
because you guys.
Just because of us. And
how did Larry take that?
I remember he just kind of looked at her. He was like, "What, woman?" And then Betty had like this look. She just looked at him, and he was like, "God damn it, it's my house. I'm drinking." And he just took his beer and just stormed out.
I'm imagining like Hank from King of the Hill.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then he would sit in his truck and drink beer there. And I remember he used to stare at me like, God, I hate this brown kid so much. I can't drink beer in my apartment anymore because of him.
Larry is now in Donald Trump's cabinet.
Yeah, he's the Secretary of State. But
Secretary of Beer.
So, but yeah, she just took care of us and
even made concessions for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like imagine if someone came over to help you and then their kids followed you back home.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh God. And then you just sort of like, you just volunteer.
Just took them in.
And then you ask their parents, like, what is it that, maybe you guys are sensitive about? And they said like biryani or like, something that's just, I'm trying to think of something that's like very, like chai. They're like,
Yeah.
We don't want our kids around tea.
Yeah.
We're Mormon. We don't drink caffeine.
Right.
Like what would a Muslim family do? They'd be
freaking out.
They'd be like, okay, they can come over for maybe 30 seconds a day because I need to have my coffee or my tea. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
I mean, I don't think people understand beer. Muslims oftentimes frame beer in like, oh, it's the evil of evils. It is poisonous. I believe that. It's toxic. But beer oftentimes for the average, person who is not Muslim and they drink beer.
Particularly in some cultures, like in the South.
It's almost to us like chai.
Yeah, no, that is their chai because I knew a brother who became Muslim, and he basically said that after he became Muslim, he stopped drinking. He said it was just nearly impossible for him to have a conversation with his dad anymore because he said that just the way he grew up, the way their culture was, that was the only time they talked was they put on football, they drank beer, and that's the only time they could talk.
Cracked open a cold one.
Yeah.
So that when your coworker, just a little heads up, when your coworker offers to take you out for drinks or says, come drink with us or come to the bar, they're not trying to be offensive. In fact, that's actually like, that's a really, really big deal.
That's an invite into the inner circle.
Invite into their life. And so Larry did this, right?
Yeah.
Got rid of the beer.
Everything. And we just stayed close from there on out. Extremely close. She basically was like a khala to me because my mom's sister, because my mom actually has, a couple have passed away now, rahimahumullah, but my mom had 8 sisters. And I, whenever we would visit overseas once every few years, I'd meet them and I was like, oh my God, you have 8 sisters. I had one and I was like, that must suck for you. And, so being a kid, but she was actually more like a khala because I just saw her every single day and she was like family. And we remained close over the next, 20, 25 years until, she passed away. She had gotten cancer. She was really sick there towards the end. My mom basically spent the last couple of weeks just at her bedside, just sitting with her, being with her. And the day before she passed away, she accepted Islam.
That's really powerful.
Yeah. But she taught, so a lot of times this lesson is kind of like, oh, look, we didn't, I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just gave her the nur of Iman because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to, decreed to, and she was amazing. But she taught us way more. She taught me and us way more than we ever taught her.
One of those Muslims without the shahada kind of deal.
Yeah, I learned what it would look like if I actually, lived my Islam with my neighbors.
And I wonder sometimes, subhanAllah, when you hear stories like this, if my neighbor came home with a cast, would I be able to do, what? And as a Muslim, I'm supposed to have this sort of generosity. I'm supposed to. Whether or not it's there, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But so that story always really shook me and sort of rattled me and still continues to this day. Every time I hear it, it kind of makes me feel this reality check of what kind of neighbor am I? Do I ignore my neighbors? Do I even know when they're hungry?
Yeah.
Some of the interesting hadith about being a neighbor, it focuses a lot on sort of reading between the lines.
Yeah.
And not necessarily
not sleeping full when your neighbors are hungry.
Exactly, but you can't expect your neighbor to come ask for food.
No.
Like sometimes you just have to be perceptive.
Yes.
Not a spy, but perceptive.
Right.
Maybe you notice that the trash bags aren't very full.
Mm-hmm.
You notice that you don't, back in the old days, you wouldn't see the smoke coming from the chimney, meaning they weren't cooking. So there are ways to get to know people in a non-intrusive way where you can sort of be helpful and be of service.
Absolutely.
And, still not sacrifice their dignity while helping them. Absolutely. So I think one of the things, and this seems like a very micro point to a macro problem. We started off talking about Donald Trump and the Republicans and this and that. But I really do believe in my heart of hearts that if our community can just focus on being better neighbors, then we will see less Islamophobic sentiment.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying that there isn't such thing as colonialism, or racism, or Islamophobia.
Absolutely.
That's outside of our control. Like you could give someone a brick of gold every day, and they would still curse you in your beliefs. Right? Yeah. There are some people that are like that. There are the Abu Lahabs. Right? They exist. But I think personally, and I agree with Abdul Sattar, my friend, in that regard. I think he was saying that there are some that you try and try and try, but they still are just going to do what they do. I still think, however, that we do have a big responsibility that we're missing out on.
And my point to the students was, particularly for younger folks, I just think that it's not very exciting. It's not very flashy. It's not big and grand and amazing and groundbreaking and earth-shattering enough. Because you're just basically telling individuals to get out there and connect with other individuals. And that just doesn't seem like it's like making moves. And, but change is a very incremental, gradual process.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, I was just last night.
Cumulative.
Tuesday night, we had the Sirah class. And we went through a story of Amr bin al-As, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and then, of course, next week we'll be talking about Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, how they accepted Islam. And Khalid and Amr, who were two of the most influential figures before Islam in Mecca and after Islam in Medina, in the Muslim community, and how they accepted Islam 20 years after the Prophet ﷺ started preaching the message.
I love the story about how Khalid converted.
It's unbelievable.
It was like a compliment, right? That was
Absolutely.
It.
And Amr bin al-As too, he's like, look, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is eventually going to win this and he's going to take over Makkah. I'm not going to hang around to see that happen. So I'm going to peace out. He goes to East Africa, a Najashi, goes there and basically tries to take up residence with a Najashi. He makes a little mistake, kind of ends up offending Najashi because of something he says about the Muslims. And Najashi actually hits him, and Amr is bleeding, and Najashi kind of feels bad. And then Najashi, kind of starts talking to him, and Amr starts asking him about the faith, about Islam, about the religion, and he realizes Najashi is covertly a Muslim, the king of Abyssinia. And Amr, he actually says to himself, يعرف هذا الحق العرب والعجم وأنت تخالف.
So basically, that both the Arab and the non-Arab understand that this is the truth, but you differ from it?
Yeah, you still oppose it?
Yeah.
Why? What's wrong with you? Why are you being so stubborn? Right? And he just comes to this realization, but it's 20 years later. Listen, anybody who thinks that they're so awesome that they got all these strategies and cool ideas and innovative solutions, no, you are not smarter and better than the Prophet ﷺ. And it took him 20 years to convert some people, to just chip away at some people. So, but we got to get out there and we got to start doing it. And the more of us that get out there and start doing it, we will start to see the impact maybe in 4 years, maybe in 8 years, maybe in 12 years. Maybe in 20 years.
Or maybe we won't.
Or maybe we won't. We'll like that famous old expression, we'll plant the seed. We'll plant the seed of the tree that somebody else sits under the shade of.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one of our friends from Knoxville, Nadeem, he used to say sincerity is when you plant the seeds of the tree that you never get to enjoy the fruit.
Nope.
Or sit under the shade of that tree.
Exactly.
But you know that you're doing it for obviously greater reasons than yourself.
Exactly.
One of the points that sometimes often is brought up, I kind of climbed there a little bit, but is the idea that it's not, why is it my job? Like, I'm Muslim, but why is it my job to respond to bigotry? Like, these people are just bad people. Like, it's not my responsibility. I didn't sign up for this. And interestingly, I've actually had, people come to me and they said, I asked them about, do you dialogue with people who have racist statements? Like, do you talk to them? Do you try to educate them? Because a lot of times it's just miseducation or lack of education. And they say, no, it's not my job to educate. And I oftentimes wonder, what if the Prophet ﷺ said that about Omar?
Yeah.
It's not my job to teach him. He's a this, he's a that. He's a womanizer. He's an alcoholic. It's not my job to teach Umar bin Khattab, But now, because the Prophet didn't, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, have that methodology, he did think of it as it was his responsibility to teach even those that everyone else gave up on.
True.
The famous hadith or the narration about Omar that the man said his donkey will convert before he ever does.
Right.
So everyone gave up on Omar.
Right.
But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam still spent time with him. When he showed up at his door, he said, "Isn't it about time, Omar? Yeah. Isn't it about time?" Right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the issues that we need to get over is that being Muslim, you have been given this immense privilege and gift of understanding the world as it should be and as it is. And that perspective, is not a privilege that you just hold on to for yourself.
No.
And then you look down shamefully on everybody else. It's something that you yearn, not just through preaching, but through experience to give to other people. Absolutely.
The thing I'll mention about that is a little bit harsh. Just a little harsh.
Just do it.
But
do it for the vine. R.I.P.
If we do take this blessing and not do anything with it, not fulfill the responsibilities, the obligations that come with it, it can get taken away. It belongs to Allah.
Mm-hmm.
That's arrogance to think that we own something.
I think a lot of times people replace that understanding. They get so caught up in the social justice element, which is important.
Yes.
But they'll make statements like, Islam is at its core social justice. That's actually not true.
Right.
Islam at its core is a relationship with Allah.
Yes.
And a byproduct of a relationship with God is qist.
Right.
Justice, being fair, equality. Those are things that are byproducts. But Islam at its core is, in fact, just having that relationship with God.
And that's where the humility comes from.
Absolutely.
That's where the humility comes from. So that you don't, it's interesting, how many people started off their work being exactly maybe good-hearted, hardworking, sacrificing, selfless people and individuals, and ended up becoming self-obsessed, ego-driven, egotistical, maniacal monsters.
Yeah, like we were criticizing Hillary a little bit in her foundation, things like that, but she did a lot of good, especially early on. You know, she talked about healthcare for children and
Right.
education for children, and she's a pioneer for women's rights. And I'm not analyzing her soul,
No.
but a lot of her actions as of recent, you know, who she speaks to, who she politics with, who she campaigns with and takes money from, there's a lot of problems there.
A lot.
So just because someone started the right way doesn't mean they'll end the right way.
Not at all.
Absolutely. Quick question here. A lot of people have this question. I got asked it today probably, 10 times actually. People are sort of remorseful, regretful. They're grieving. They're grieving this morning. Like I said earlier, it feels like Voldemort has returned. Muslims in the political process. So we talked a little bit about this whole apathy, this material comfort.
Right.
But what about like from a religious perspective? Voting, is it haram? Am I getting involved? Is it kufr akbar? Is it the great, is it the great disbelief? Like what is the deal with voting as a Muslim person? Should I feel guilty? Do I have blood on my hands? Am I accountable for the mistakes that a politician make? Like these are all questions that I've been asked literally in the last, 12 to 24 hours.
So so the modern system of voting is something that there is not a precedent for from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So what that means is that we won't necessarily have any explicit and authentic evidence directly speaking to this issue, nor do we have a prophetic precedent. So therefore, issues like this basically are oftentimes referred to as things that are masail, issues that are ijtihadi, that they basically need to be figured out. They need to be solved. They need to be solved in light of bigger principles, overarching kind of ideas, and texts. So when it comes to this particular issue, there's a few thoughts that basically intersect with one another here. The first idea is that when you facilitate and enable and support someone into a position of influence or power or ability, you do then bear some responsibility, at least partial, for the wrong that they might commit in that position. That there's an idea. And it's not completely wrong. It's not completely false. However, I do think that it gets extended way too far, and it does get taken way out of context.
So if I voted for Barack Obama, droned people, whether it's in Yemen or Pakistan or Afghanistan, I'm now accountable for the things that he did. I'll be asked by Allah.
So that's what I'm talking about, right? Because the idea here is that man dalla ala al-khayri kafa'ilihi, that somebody who points or leads to good, then it's as if they've done good. So somebody who maybe points or directs to evil is like the person committing evil. So the idea there kind of is like me trying to convince someone to commit like something that is immoral or haram, impermissible. But in this instance, the reason why I say there maybe gets taken out of context is that if somebody has a particular policy and I'm voting for that policy, I'm voting for those politics, I'm voting for that issue specifically, then yes, there can be some culpability, some liability, some responsibility. But if I'm voting for someone, based on a particular platform, and they go on to do something that I find to be reprehensible, there is a limit to how far responsibility extends.
Yeah, because there's the ayah, obviously.
Exactly.
وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وَزْرَ أُخْرَى.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, in fiqh, we do not embrace the concept of like a third-party liability. So meaning that if I sell cars and you come to buy a car, then I'm not responsible. It's not my problem where you get that money to buy that car from. Like, meaning in the sense of, obviously, I'm not going to like sit there and just ignore, you open up a trunk and there's like a dead person and a duffel bag full of cash. And I'm just kind of like, boo, I don't see anything. Right? That's not what I'm talking about.
So dumb.
But I'm saying, like, if you end up
your examples make me wonder so much, like, about like what experiences you've had.
Listen.
Arlington, Texas, baby.
Listen, I do what I do.
So you don't necessarily have to snoop or spy about where someone earns their living.
Yeah, but if you show up with the check now, are you going to be paying interest on that money that you borrowed? Like, that's not my problem at this point. I can't worry about that. If I'm selling you a laptop, are you going to go and, God forbid, or I sell someone a laptop, are they going to, God forbid, go and then watch pornography on that laptop?
Thank you for switching you to somebody. I
do
appreciate
what
it.
I do. Listen,
Always looking out for me.
I just told you I do what I do.
MashaAllah. May Allah preserve you, ya sheikh.
So, but that's my point is
Gotcha.
that,
so you're not accountable for me, what I do on this laptop.
No,
I'm not accountable for what you do
Yeah.
on any of your Apple products.
No.
Because you got them all as gifts, basically, right? So we're not all responsible for your Apple products.
Not at all.
Right? That's on you.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And so that being said, right, so there is a limit to this. So we don't even accept the idea of that third-party liability because that's a very slippery slope. If we start embracing the idea of third-party liability, we'd end up in a position where none of us could basically do anything. We'd have to just go and live and never interact with another human being at all, ever.
Because there is this very famous notion that if somebody sees something, for example, like if if a sister is dressed a certain way and the brother can't stop looking, or if a brother is dressed a certain way, the sisters can't stop looking, and it causes them to have these desirous thoughts and behaviors, then some scholars have actually put the onus on the person who's being stared at or looked at. And this is, in a way, it kind of resembles victim blaming,
Yes,
right?
it does.
Because this person is sort
No,
of...
that person might have a sin. So let's just say there is a person who is not covering minimally what is required in the Sharia to cover.
So a dude's just walking around shirtless.
Completely, right?
Muhammad Jangda.
Exactly. He's just with his diaper on straight up. All right?
Adult diaper at this point.
Exactly. So he's just walking around completely not even covering the minimum from the navel to the knee that men have to cover. And somebody sees it, and whatever the case may be, whatever feelings or sentiments that arouses within the person who sees it,
Yeah.
he is that person who's not covered appropriately is committing a sin. But their sin is not covering properly.
Yeah.
But they are not sharing in the sin of the person who continues to sit there and ogle and stare at them.
Which that itself is a problem.
Correct.
But that person is not taking the burden of that.
No.
That
not at all.
person's
They
sin
can't.
is isolated from that.
Exactly. There's two completely different things.
Yeah. And that because I think that in some way, shape, or form, that web becomes really too complex.
It's ridiculous.
And
it's
impossible.
not practical, and Islam is not designed that way as a deen.
Yeah. So that's number one for the voting is like, should I feel guilty? Should I feel accomplice? And a lot of times too, I think it's fair to say that in politics, there really is, fiqh might be interesting to dive into this. There really is a lack of certainty on a platform.
Yes.
When a politician says something, it's common knowledge now to know that is just a statement, actually.
Yeah.
And there's no actual, there's no concrete evidence that that's going to be delivered.
Not at all.
So if I vote for somebody, and while they were campaigning on their platform, they said, I'm going to do this thing. If that thing is sinful, actually that thing is not necessarily concrete. So I don't even know.
Yeah.
My vote necessarily, as long as it wasn't for that, the fulfillment of it, I don't even know if that person's truly going to do that.
Yeah.
So how can I be accountable for a fake
No, you
promise? And because I think more politicians know and people know that in politics, most promises are pie in the sky, fake.
Right.
Even Donald Trump, 90% of the things he said he was going to do, he can't do.
Yeah.
Right. So people are all excited about this or scared over it. But in reality, he can't deliver. Even Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, I think South Carolina, he's like, he can't do all of this. It's not going to work. It's not feasible. It's not plausible. So that's number one, is that I, as a Muslim, am not accountable for Obama's drone strikes unless I voted for him for that reason.
Yeah, correct.
Then I have that accountability.
Right.
Okay.
And then the other thing is another.
What about assigning a judge besides Allah or living under a law that's not Allah's law?
Yeah, well, Ali bin Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu responded to that. He said, "Kalimatu haqqin urida bihi ghayr al-haqq." That basically ghayrahu. He said that you are using true words, the words of the truth, but you're using them to prove a point that is not
That's
right
not
at
true.
all.
Yeah, you're kind of twisting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, we've from the very beginning, we've had systems of governance. We've had, human beings be responsible in certain areas and make rules and draw up lines and, create systems of, organization so that we can live our lives within them. And that's never been an indictment for us to embrace those ideas.
Otherwise, what would there be? I mean, theoretically, if there was seriously an issue with appointing a leader and that leader was coming up with protocol or rules or laws, let's say, that didn't necessarily weren't derived exactly from the Quran or Sunnah or Sharia, then how, like voting for an HOA president?
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference? Like the president of a country versus the president of your organization.
Exactly.
If you say, as Sheikh Abdel Nasser, as the director and the lead instructor of Qalam Institute, if you walk into class one day and say, no one can eat snacks in here, can I say, where is that in the Quran, brother?
Yeah.
I mean,
that'd be preposterous.
If I listen to your rule, then am I abiding by a lawmaker other than Allah?
It's just silly.
The example doesn't go to its logical conclusion.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It's too just illogical of an idea and a concept.
It's misapplying.
And that's why it's only been embraced by extremely fanatically extremist people.
And the problem is people use this rhetoric to combat. And it's almost like they're trying to just shade their apathy towards the process.
Correct.
So instead of becoming involved, they're like, no, I think it's haram.
Right.
A lot of people actually told me that they didn't get involved at all because they were told voting is haram.
Wow.
Did you vote?
I did.
You did?
I did.
Voted for Hillary?
I voted straight down the Democratic ticket.
They had a button, actually.
Exactly.
Here in Texas, all Democrat.
And I did that mainly for congressional seats, Senate seats, local seats, things like that. Particularly, I know now it seems like obviously it was a pipe dream. I just dreamed about having a majority in, the Senate and then Bernie potentially being Senate Majority Leader, head of the Finance Committee. And then even if Hillary won, he was probably going to torment her.
Yeah, he actually said that his goal is going to be to push her as far left as he could.
Yeah, he was probably going to make her life miserable, which I would just love watching.
Don't you just wish Bernie Sanders was your uncle?
I do. I think he is.
Or your dad? Can you call Uncle Bernie?
So
he's just so lovable.
Yeah.
Man. Okay. So those are some really, really honestly present issues in our Muslim community.
Yeah.
As much as we're sort of just kind of like, oh, that was so 10 years ago. I thought so, at least until yesterday when I got bombarded with these questions. So that's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
Where do you think these notions came from? These notions of being involved in American voting or politics is haram.
Okay. Well, I mean, to go back to an earlier point, a lot of that is it's very closely related to a lot of the after effects of colonialism.
Interesting. Explain a little bit.
Well, I mean, you had European powers that moved into so many different Africa, Asia, Middle East, like all these Muslim countries, and otherwise, but they just moved into these countries and kind of superimposed their laws and their systems upon them. When they left, there was almost like this resentment, this rejection of their ways, their concept, their government, their laws. But what we didn't realize, what a lot of people didn't understand, was that we weren't abstaining and boycotting and rebelling and bucking against kind of the system altogether while being occupied by them anymore. We are now immigrants, minorities, living within these parts of the world, and the same logic just does not apply to how my grandparents reacted to the British in India. Than how I should react to the American, system and legal mechanism, here today. It's just a completely different set of circumstances, and the same logic will not apply at all. Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel a lot of tension? I know you have 3 kids. 2 of them are at elementary school now.
Yeah.
Were there any questions about that this morning? A lot of parents were really scared.
They were.
I actually got phone calls until about 3 in the morning from people all over, texts and phone calls and stuff like that about just advice, because people know that I work with, younger folks and stuff like that. So they were like, how would you break the news? My kids are sleeping right now, but when they wake up.
Yeah. Aisha didn't go to school. She had strep throat, so she's just chilling. But Mariam, it was really funny. She kind of wanted to stay up and watch as long as she could. And when she woke up in the morning, she was like, who won? I was like, Donald Trump. And she's like, oh no. I was like, yeah. So
I think kids' reaction to this is actually very interesting.
Very interesting.
And it shows a lot about like what they hear.
Exactly.
At school, because you probably didn't talk a lot about it at home.
No, I didn't.
Just school kids probably.
Exactly. And I just, she's mentioned a bunch of stuff that, that girl was saying and this kid was saying that we're going to have to leave Donald Trump becomes president. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, baby. Don't listen to those stupid kids. She's like, hey, she's my friend.
You're like, now pack your bags. We have to leave.
She's like, that's my friend. I was like, well, your friend is dumb. He's
joking, by the way.
Yes. But, so no, I just kind of laughed it off. She's like, oh no, I was just laughed it off in the morning. I was like, look, maybe it's going to be fine. Listen, did you pray Fajr? Did you make dua? Yeah. Okay. Then that's it. You just say Bismillah and, you say Alhamdulillah when you leave the home and you just do your thing and you don't worry about any of that. All right. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of everything. And,
which is the other side of the whole idea of being involved.
Yeah.
Is that you have to anchor yourself to your relationship with Allah.
Of course.
Right? That's actually, I think, part of the reason we just talked about this, before we started recording, about how, like, we're not really, like, losing sleep over this.
Nah.
It's definitely weird.
Yeah.
It feels weird.
It just, like I said in the very beginning, it just feels weird to me because this guy is supposed to be on a TV show.
Yeah. It feels strange saying President Trump.
Exactly.
I feel like I have to make wudu every time I say
what's next? I mean, I don't know. I don't even watch enough TV, but it's like
Kanye West, dude, 2020.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what's next.
You're in get off my lawn mode right now.
I'm telling you. And watch Gary Johnson mess up Kanye's West selection as well. Gary Johnson strikes again.
Gary Johnson's my boy, dude. I think Donald Trump paid Gary Johnson to just, anyways, attract all the marijuana smokers.
Be Gary Johnson.
Yeah. So your kids, did you kind of sort of gave them the sort of Imani reminder?
Yeah, I just gave them an Imani reminder, and I mean, I talk to them very openly, plainly. I don't really, I have no problems just talking to them about anything. But at the same time, I also wanted to kind of, because they feed off your kind of emotion, and so I just wanted to really give them the vibe, the feel of just calm, confidence, and just clarity.
That kind of leads to my final question for this podcast.
Sure.
Where do we go from here? It feels weird. It's November 9th.
Yeah.
Tomorrow will be the 10th when this podcast drops.
Correct.
Keeping it 100.
Yep.
Lit.
Absolutely.
Lit af woke.
Snooze.
Where do we go from here, dude? Like, I go home now, gonna see my wife, we're gonna eat dinner.
Yeah.
It just feels like, this morning when I met with Rabbi Charlie, he says his shaloms.
All right.
To you. Rabbi Charlie is he's the rabbi of the Colleyville synagogue. The Sheikh al-Banasher used to be the imam of the masjid. Now I'm the imam of the masjid, so it's kind of like the heir apparent. But he sends his shaloms to you. Rabbi Charlie this morning, when we met, I met with him and a priest of a local Good Shepherd.
Nice, yeah.
His name's Father James. We met and we talked about how to make, Colleyville more diverse and inclusive and faiths not feel scared and trying to build those bridges. Rabbi Charlie hugged me as though we were attending a funeral. Yeah, that's the feeling that it gave me. Like he was like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay? Are you, do you need and I can't help but think that this is going to be the emotion that a lot of people are going to feel for the next couple of days.
Sure.
Ali Baluch, I was just texting him and he was saying there's like a really tangible tension in the air. A lot of my friends are saying at work, everyone's quiet. People have, on the one hand, they've told people, they've broken down in tears. They don't know what's going to happen. On the other hand, you have the Trump supporters who have told people, you need to be quiet and respect him. He's our president. Where do we go from here? What advice do you want to give to the Muslim community on how to move from this, how to process this?
So 3 things. Number 1, I will say, kind of going back to an earlier point, but I want to highlight this here because it's such a great example. That whole thing about, folks in the cities and the fancy, the young, the educated, the metropolitan folks who talk a lot and talk all the time, they kind of neglected, ignored, and overlooked the people in between big cities, the wide, massive expanse of rural America. The people of rural America talk once every 4 years, and it's louder than the noise we make every day.
They're committed. I posted this last night. I know this is ironic because you're talking about not posting, but I said what I learned tonight was that millennials suck.
Yeah.
And I'm a millennial, by the way.
Yeah.
And I actually will fully admit right now on air that I am accomplice to this, that we only become interested in elections for 120 to 90 days.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Everything else, we think that Instagram holds the key to justice.
Yes.
We think that the internet holds the key to liberation.
Absolutely.
And in reality, we lose focus of what does a council person do? Mm-hmm. What does a school board member do?
Yeah.
And we don't know how to fight those battles.
No.
The only time we get angry is when they're removing, climate change from science textbooks, or when they're, doing things, and then we get upset. We try to look up who's the school board, commissioner or whatever, and we don't even actually stay. So one thing that I learned, going off of your first point, is that if you're not committed like the people of rural America are, they will beat you every time.
Every single time.
Nadeem used to say this in Knoxville. It's so funny. We'd be watching a football game and he's like, this game is already won. The game hadn't started yet. We're waiting for the teams to take the field. He goes, it's already won. I said, what do you mean? He goes, it was won in practice. Whoever practiced better, smarter, harder, that team is going to end up winning. And I think that stands true for elections, is that millennials and young people in general just don't practice.
Right.
We don't think of this stuff. We don't discuss this stuff. We're not actually engaged and involved on a real level, whereas rural America is.
Yeah. So I think that's just something that we need to realize and pay a lot more attention to. And that goes back to our earlier point of learning from them, and then also talking to them and building bridges and kind of working. A second thing about kind of where to go from here, and I'm just going to kind of spout off like some of these things. The second thing is this, that the thought leadership of a movement that's actually going to bring about change, that's going to make a difference, have an impact, it has to have a vision. It has to be concrete. It has to be solid. It has to be committed. It has to have clarity and confidence and power. There's got to be a vision. And this centrist garbage that we were sold by these establishment Democrats was the most uninspiring, totally lacking in just garbage that, nobody was inspired by, nobody cared for, nobody believed in. And we just can't have any more of this.
And they actually sabotaged, the most inspiring candidate that they had for an establishment career politician.
A centrist. Yeah. Who just didn't stand for anything, constantly compromising. Republican foreign policy, Republican in economic policy. And
actually, Trump and Bernie aligned on the trade.
Trade policy. And I told you I've just been reading. I'm just learning. Last night I read that two things, and actually
you sound like an excited first grader.
Yeah. And since 1980, I can actually recall and remember in every single election, Republicans have two particular mantras. Number one is small government. Number two is free trade. And Trump or his advisors or whoever, because I'm still not convinced he actually knows what's going on half the time. Yeah. But whoever was responsible for Trump, him or otherwise, they realized that the people that they were trying to get votes from were actually wanting the government to be a lot more involved in their lives, rule America, and et cetera. That's why. And so he kept talking about law and order. He dropped the line about small government, and he went totally no free trade and just talked about just sealing everything and everyone off, and just looking after ourselves and taking care of ourselves. He completely departed from the Republican mantra. It's fascinating. So what I'm trying to say is, as ugly as a vision or as scary as a vision might have been, there was a vision.
He had one.
Exactly.
And if you looked at the advertisements leading up to the election day, Hillary's literally was constantly focused on one thing, and that was the deplorability of Donald Trump.
Yes.
It kept focusing on his negative characteristics. Trump focused on Hillary for sure, but then he also, I noticed this in his ads actually, because I pay attention to these things, he actually started talking about what was his game plan.
Yeah.
He would say, do you want a career politician, 30 years? What has she done? Donald Trump will increase jobs. He'll make, he'll lower taxes, yada, yada, yada. Hillary's was literally all about his negativity. That's a lack of vision.
Yeah.
If all you're doing is talking about somebody else, you're not talking about where you're going to take us.
Right.
And I'm not convinced, honestly speaking. The only reason I wanted Hillary was because of more democratic balance. I'm not convinced she even had a real vision.
No, nothing. And so that's part of it, that we just have to, get involved, have a clear vision, know what we're doing, know what we're voting for, what we're fighting for, what we're going to be working towards. And just rattling off a few things. Another big thing for me, and I mentioned this to you before we got on the podcast, was if there is a silver lining that comes from this, then the silver lining that comes from this is we have finally been able to, Donald Trump for us, has banished the Clintons. We no longer have to deal with these people anymore. Elitist, establishment, dynasty, empire building, self-absorbed, self-obsessed egomaniacs.
And this is someone who voted for Hillary, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's important to not have it's important to not be so committed to something that you lose sight of what someone might actually represent.
Right.
I know a lot of people who were so committed to beating Donald Trump that Hillary almost became a savior for them. Mm-hmm. Not that Hillary necessarily is like, again, I'm not saying that we know where her afterlife is going to be. What I'm saying is that what she represents is unfortunately political elitism that is exploitative. It is endangering towards the middle class.
Yes.
I mean, she has not proven in her time, and it's really warmongering. You know,
Yeah.
you look at the amount of times that people were killed via drone during her time as Secretary of State. It was even more than George Bush.
And what just the Clintons did for their ego to just be back in the White House and build their political dynasty, they sabotaged the entire the progress of 8 years and the future of the Democratic Party. They sabotaged and bought and ruined all of it.
And any good work that President Obama did.
It's all gone. You know, all the progress that Bernie was making was all wiped away, washed away by all this back channeling and backroom dealing. And just for the fulfillment of their own ego, and they're building their political dynasty. And, you know, man takabbara wada'ahu Allah, Allah debases them. And, I mean, couldn't even pull up the courage to actually come out and give a concession speech last night.
Yeah.
We're just done with them. I'm just glad to be able to wash our hands of them. And I hope and pray that, you know, the Democratic Party is able to learn their lesson, you know, bring some of these really visionary people like Bernie Sanders and others into the party, just hand them the reins, because the Clintons are going to be completely, you know, they've been the ones who've been boxing out people like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and our brother Keith Ellison and all these other people. They've been boxing them out. But now they have nothing to gain anymore. And I don't think they're going to be even interested in hanging around. And hopefully they can come in and just shake things up and give us a much, much better alternative and a clear vision that we can work on together going forward into the future, hopefully. And yeah, those are just a few of the, you know, kind of thoughts and ideas that I basically had. Oh yeah, the last thing I was going to say. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, second last thing we'll kind of end on just, you know, just a note for spirituality for the community. Both of us should just mention something. But one other profound point for me that I came across that I'm learning. You know, being a Muslim, I've always been very weary of sounding to conspiracy theorists like, you know, oh, media is against us and all that. I don't want to sound like, you know, a crazy old uncle that I used to hear talking at, you know, parties and dawats growing up. So I'm always weary of sounding like that guy. But we absolutely realized how we can't trust the media, and not so much because maybe of its nefariousness. We can't trust the media because of its absolute pure incompetence. Mm-hmm. They suck. Listen, in any other field of work, if you sucked that bad at your job, you'd never get to do it again. Mm-hmm. If I drove a bus and I like just straight up just drove it into a ditch for no apparent reason. It wasn't raining. There wasn't an accident. I just went straight off road, right on.
Again, your examples. I'm just so curious. Like, I just want to know more.
I just drove this big old bus 60 miles per hour into a big old ditch, like, just like that.
What's your agenda going to be like? So far, you have
it's just monster trucks,
dead body in a trunk with a box of cash.
It's just going to be monster trucks.
Okay,
but and if I drove this bus straight off, I should not be allowed to drive a bus anymore.
Yeah, epic fail.
Okay.
Can't recover from that.
No, that's the way it works. Nobody who was involved in punditry and in political like commentary leading up to they should all be fired and never be allowed to do that job ever again. 36 hours before Donald Trump, you know, won the election.
He won it handily, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bigly.
He was right. I think he's going to end up with like 300 and like some 10 or something like that electoral votes.
And Obama won it in 2012 with 330.
Wow.
Think about that.
And we thought that was a slam dunk.
Yeah, we were like, oh, game over.
Yeah. There's
no way, you know, that Obama's going to look at this guy, man. He almost got 300.
Wow.
So people were all basically
I think Michigan
oh.
and Arizona aren't completely done yet, but they're trending for Trump.
Yeah.
And what's the name? What I was going to say was 36 hours before he won the actual election, the New York Times said Hillary had like a 70% chance of winning the election.
Yeah.
36 hours later, like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before Donald Trump was declared the winner, now they were saying that he had a 95% chance of winning the election. You were that far off.
It's your only job.
That's all you do. And so the reason why I bring this point up is just educate yourself, read, talk to people, sit with people, educate your mind. Drop all the media. Stop consuming media nonstop, a constant stream, because they are stupid people who have no idea what they're doing, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Just stop polluting your mind with that bakwas, that nonsense.
And here you're clearly talking about like the major networks.
Yes,
you obviously you got the exceptions like Glenn Greenwald.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. Educate. Look for those people.
Yeah,
but you just sit there watching CNN mindlessly, MSNBC stupidly, right? Or let alone Fox News or anything else like that. They have no idea what they're talking about.
If you actually watch the first couple episodes of the show Newsroom, it actually really gives you a deep insight into how these news channels work and how it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out, but basically there's a lot of agenda.
Yes.
But the idea of a 24-hour news channel is inherently detrimental to the news.
Yeah, it's just watering down the quality.
And they always have to try to make a big deal out of something, otherwise ratings
filling
drop.
The space.
Right? And so following that and taking what they say as gospel, you're only going to make poor decisions.
Absolutely.
So don't base your decisions off of that stuff.
Just educate yourself, man. Read. That's why I just turned off the TV at a certain point last night and just went online. And
I found Twitter to be more reliable.
Exactly. And I just started following like specifically people who are professors, they're academics, they're community organizers. I was just reading what they were saying, and they were putting out, and subhanAllah, people like that, because they're about educating, they were posting, they were tweeting like articles and things like that. And I was just reading article after article after article after article. And it was a lot more enlightening.
Yeah.
That's why I actually am like a Satan person today. I actually have thoughts.
Yeah.
As
opposed to just like being lost.
Just rambling and just being like, oh my God, Donald Trump, I'm going to move to Canada. It's like, no, nobody's moving to Canada, okay?
Yeah.
Should I say mean things about Canada right now?
I'll allow it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm not going to say mean things about America's hat.
America's largest forest preserve. So that's a great transition to the concluding spiritual point. And just to be clear, politics is not religion.
No.
And I actually said this today to somebody, and they were like shocked.
Yeah.
It's not it wasn't sinful if someone voted for Donald Trump, correct? Mm-hmm. So you can't say that this person has acquired sin, because this is an issue,
unless there's a hadith about voting for Donald Trump.
Yes.
It goes back to their intentionality.
Exactly.
It goes back to their reality.
And I think that, as dumb as it would have been for them to vote for him, I cannot say that this person has pushed themselves outside the favor of Allah because of this. So politics and religion, those are things that even classically they stay far away.
Yes.
They stay far apart. But spirituality now is what we're talking about. In last podcast episode, we kind of drew the line here. Legal definitions in religion are one thing, but spirituality, or iman, let's say faith, is how our relationship with Allah interacts with every aspect of our life. And there's no problem with that. There's no problem with that.
Beautiful.
If I have a lifestyle, spirituality is basically your faith lifestyle, basically.
Yes.
So let's end this with a little bit of a spiritual point.
Spiritually speaking, a lot of times it feels like an oversimplification, but that's what iman. That's what iman is. That's what belief does.
Keeps it simple.
Yeah, it clarifies everything. It simplifies everything.
No.
It's like turning the light on in a big old warehouse. Makes it simple. You can see where you're going, where you're walking, and so Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is the one in control. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is the one that we all depend on, and the one that everyone will answer to. And Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has a plan, and we just need to make sure that we are, good with God, so to speak. Borrow an expression from the South. We got to just make sure that we're good with God, that we keep things good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, never waver in our faith, our trust, our dependence, our reliance upon Him. You know, I kind of posted online just the example that always inspires me. It's one of my favorite kind of Quranic like moments where Musa alayhi salam takes Banu Israel and they're standing there in front of the sea and they're kind of looking out at the sea being like, where do we go from here, Musa? Mm-hmm. And then Fir'aun and his ginormous army, they approach from behind and they turn around, they see the army, they look at the ocean, they see the army and they say, Ya Musa, inna lamudrakun. Musa, we're done. We're finished. We're doomed. And Musa alayhi salam says, Kalla. Absolutely not. Inna ma'i rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord, my Master, my Allah is with me and He will make a way. فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى أَنِ اضْرِب بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ فَانْفَلَقَ فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ كَالطَّوْدِ الْعَظِيمِ. Then Allah says that He commanded Musa alayhi salam to go and strike the sea with his staff. And he walks out into the water and he takes his staff and he strikes it in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the sea is split. And the people are saved. One of the greatest miracles humanity's probably ever witnessed. Sea is split. And the believers walk clean, straight, dry, right through. And Fir'aun and his army is all handled easily by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the real important part of it is that as hopeless, as desperate, as scary as that moment seemed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could make a way where there was no way. We just got to make sure that we never waver, we never lose faith. And then the element of work is kind of mentioned there because Allah told Musa alayhi salam, walk out into the water and strike the sea with your staff. We got to roll up our sleeves. We got to do our work, never waver in our faith and trust in Allah, and Allah will make a way.
Sea didn't just split on its own.
That's it.
There was some sort of cause.
Precisely.
Even though the cause sometimes doesn't make sense to us.
No.
Like if I go take a stick and hit a pond, nothing's going to happen.
Nope.
But Allah Ta'ala did that. And I think one of the things that sort of dawned upon me last night, a couple things. Number one is that I need to understand the pulse of my community better, not just politically, but also just socially. I need to become a better neighbor.
Absolutely.
I need to become a better human. I need to treat people well, hold the door open. I need to recognize when there are minority communities, marginalized communities, and not overlook them. There's a lot of things personally, being someone who finds a specific or a particular interest in tazkiyah, I think because of my mental health background and studies, I think a lot of the problems that we deal with as a society basically boil down to individual people's diseases. And when you have enough people together in a room with their own deficiencies, you're going to have a couple big issues. So I think when you have this societal issue of racism, bigotry, sexism, etc., it really just points to the fact that there's a lot of people with this in their heart. So I don't want to be one of those people. Correct. I think individually we have to get started. Sure. Individual family, something that we always talk about is the family dynamic. Teaching your kids that the things that people say, even if they're popular or famous, they're not to be laughed at. They're not to be, perpetuated.
Right.
I know a lot of people who retweet things or make, laugh at things that are really seriously hurtful. And I think that what ends up happening is we end up losing the sensitivity to how painful that thing is. So Donald Trump says something and people can say, oh, it's just locker room talk. Why do you think that a person can justify Donald Trump saying that? Is because when they were younger or during their life, they were told it wasn't a big deal. So teaching kids at home that it's not okay to say those kind of things or to be around people who say those kind of things. But spiritually speaking, what sort of allowed me to fall asleep last night was that there have been many times in my life where I did not understand what was going on. There have been many times in my life where I was confused actually at something that occurred. And I constantly remember the story of the creation and the placement of Adam alayhi salam on the earth when the angels had asked Allah Ta'ala, out of curiosity, not out of challenging, are you going to put up a creation on the earth that's going to do two things? That's going to spread corruption and going to spill blood. And if you look at that description of humanity, they pretty much nailed it.
Yes.
And they actually nailed politics pretty well, corruption and murder. And Allah Ta'ala did not repel that claim. He didn't correct them even. He said, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. I know that which you don't know. So there is something deeper in the capability of human beings that is stronger than Donald Trump. Yes. We possess the ability to do more good than evil. We have to understand that there's an ultimate plan here. There's something much deeper than we can understand. And there will come a time where we will all look back and say, oh, I understand now. I get it completely. So having that faith, understandably, is very difficult at the moment. But sometimes as time goes on, as the shock wears off, as the sun starts to peek out over the clouds, it becomes a lot easier to understand that. So I just sort of have to force myself to get there. And I think we can all do that, inshallah. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining us again today on the Hangout. Thank you for coming to hang out with us on this special post-election edition of our podcast. As always, if you really enjoyed it, then you can tweet at us, #Qalam Hangout or #Qalam Podcast. Obviously, @Qalam Institute is the Twitter handle, also on Instagram. And feel free to check out the other podcasts that we offer, whether it's Sheikh Abdel Nasser's Life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ series, or Mufti Hussein's Beginning of Guidance, or Lives of the Prophets, and many other things that we hope to offer, inshallah. We hope to see you next time on the Hangout. Remember,
Inshallah.
every Thursday morning, come hang out with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.